a good day. Very welcome to this activity. We will be talking about the potential of BTK inhibitors therapies in progressive forms of multiple sclerosis. My name is Xavier Montalban. I am a neurologist. I am the director of the MS Center of Catalonia in Barcelona. So in fact, for active secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, we have a number of drugs to be used. In general, we can say that most of the drugs approved to treat relapsing multiple sclerosis can also be used to treat active SPMS. However, I would like to highlight one specific medication, siponimod, because siponimod, which is, as you know very well, S1P1, S1P5 receptor modulator, had a very focused trial on secondary progressive MS. And that's the reason why I think we should highlight that one. The trial called SPAN recruited more than 1,500 patients with secondary progressive MS. And at the end of the trial, we observed a statistically significant 21% reduction in the confirmed disability progression at 3 months. And also, we observe some reduction of a number of MRI parameters, specifically cortical gray matter. So, and this is the medication that has been used in a number of active secondary progressive MS as well, and it still is being used in most MS centers. If we talk about primary progressive multiple sclerosis, the situation is completely different because we only have one medication for that, which is ocrelizumab. Ocrelizumab is a monoclonal antibody anti-CD20. And the trial that demonstrated its utility to treat patients with PPMS is the Oratorio trial that was presented almost 10 years ago, in fact, in Barcelona. So in the Oratorio trial, we recruited more than 700 patients with primary progressive multiple sclerosis, and we observed a 24% reduction in the time to confirm disability progression after 3 months, and also a moderate effect on global atrophy. And nowadays is the only medication, as I said, approved to treat patients with primary progressive MS in many countries around the world. As you see, the therapeutic armamentarium that we have to treat our patients with progressive MS is very small. It's very small. Fortunately, most of the data coming from the real world is also supporting the efficacy of siponimod and ocrelizumab to treat patients with SPMS and primary progressive MS. Nowadays, there is a new mechanism-driven framework for MS progression, was published in Lancet Neurology in 2023. And essentially, what this means is that we have just one disease and that the mechanisms of the disease are the same for every single patient with MS. Of course, the intensity of these mechanisms are different at the earliest stages or at the latest stages of the disease, but the mechanisms themselves are the same. And as you know, we have inflammation, demyelination, axonal degeneration, mitochondrial injury, oxidative stress, glutamate excitotoxicity. All these mechanisms are present from the very earliest stage of the disease. Then, and very importantly, we have a number of potential moderators, such as biological sex, of course, genetics, race, ethnicity, microbiome, probably, comorbidities, the use of medications, the health behaviors, people who, the diet, the exercise, the comorbidities control, and also social determinants of health. And these factors modify the outcome of the disease and also the intensity of the damage in a way. But essentially, there is one single mechanism. The rationale to use BTK inhibitors in multiple sclerosis is because these are molecules that they have an effect on B cells and also on microglia. And very importantly, they cross the blood-brain barrier. So we know now that the compartmentalized inflammation within the CNS is driven mainly by B cells and microglia. And this is central to progression in multiple sclerosis. Therefore, we think that using BTK inhibitors, crossing the blood-brain barrier, and modulating the B cells within the CNS, inhibiting the microglia within the CNS may have positive effects on disability progression. If we look to the clinical trial data, we see that the first trial using the first BTK inhibitor in multiple sclerosis, evobrutinib, was negative. We failed in demonstrating any effect on evobrutinib against teriflunomide in relapsing multiple sclerosis. Fortunately, the second one used tolebrutinib. All these BTK inhibitors belongs to the same family, but they are different molecules. There are a number of differences that may explain the difference in clinical results, in clinical trial results. Tolebrutinib was tested in two large phase 3 trials, the Gemini 1 and 2, on more than 1,800 patients. The primary endpoint was negative. However, the main secondary endpoint, the pooled 6 months confirmed disability worsening, was positive, showing a 29% risk reduction against teriflunomide. Now, we were using teriflunomide and no placebo. And this is the first time that we see that. So we see this dissociation between the effect on annualized relapse rate and disability progression. That means that something different is happening here. Also, take into account that the annualized relapse rate was really very, very low in both arms, very low. So if you don't have events, it's very difficult to find any difference, of course. And also, tolebrutinib in the Hercules trial on non-active SPMS on more than 1,000 patients. Here was the primary endpoint was rich, and the primary endpoint was the time to 6 months confirmed disability progression. That was we observed a 31% risk reduction, and so very exciting results coming from the Gemini and the Hercules. And in fact, the FDA granted a priority review to tolebrutinib for multiple sclerosis. Let's see what happens here. We have other BTKs now under study. One of them is fenebrutinib, is another BTK inhibitor. There is a trial on PPMS comparing fenebrutinib against ocrelizumab. So this is a very interesting trial. Let's see what happens. In December 2026 will be completed. There is another one which called orelabrutinib. Has demonstrated in a phase 2 trial that is working in relapsing MS. Now there apparently may be considered to be used in a primary progressive MS trial. And then the last one is remibrutinib. Remibrutinib is now being tested in two large phase 3 trial on relapsing multiple sclerosis, but also probably a new trial on SPMS will start very soon. The adverse events that we observe in the trials using BTK inhibitors are mainly related to liver toxicity. So at the end, we will be monitoring these patients very often at the beginning of the treatment. But apart from the liver toxicity, nothing really important has been observed. As you know, once you have finished the phase 3 clinical trials and then you start using these medications in real life, then you just identify other side effects, or perhaps you can minimize some of the side effects observed in the clinical trials. Well, this is very speculative, of course. Still, we don't know the label of tolebrutinib, for instance. But I can speculate that I wouldn't treat naive patients with BTK inhibitors for a number of reasons. I think we like very much to treat our patients very early on with high efficacy medications. But once the patient has no focal inflammatory activity, that means no relapses, no new MRI activity, I think this is the right time to switch to BTK inhibitors to prevent disability progression. Again, very speculative. Also, I think those patients who have been treated with anti-CD20 for a number of years and they are absolutely free from focal inflammatory activity, I think they are good candidates to switch to BTK inhibitors. And patients who have been inactive, treated with other drugs, not necessarily anti-CD20, who are inactive as well, I think they can be candidates to be treated with BTK inhibitors. As you know, once you start to use one new medication, new drug, after a while, you identify which profile of patient fits better to that drug, and we will need some experience, real world experience for that.